Derrick Henry became the eighth player in NFL history to eclipse the 2,000-yard mark and the first running back since LaDainian Tomlinson to lead the league in back-to-back seasons in rushing yards. What does that do for his fantasy football value in 2021 fantasy drafts? Here with me, SI fantasy analyst Ben Heisler and Michael Fabiano. And Fabs, I know you did a lot of statistical-driven research on Derrick Henry's workload and the running backs that had 2,000 yards and their following seasons. Why don't you give us some of your insight?
Well, you mentioned that there's been 8 now, including Derrick Henry. The other 7, O.J. Simpson, Eric Dickerson, Barry Sanders, Terrell Davis, Jamal Lewis, Chris Johnson, and Adrian Peterson, guys. These are not curtain jerkers. These guys are all Hall of Famers or they're going to the Hall of Fame, all right? But you look at the numbers. The average decline in rushing yards after a back has 2,000 yards in a single season is 807, okay? And I didn't include Terrell Davis because he got hurt the following year and only played in a handful of games. The average decline in fantasy points is nearly 121. The average drop in rushing touchdowns is 5. So if we factor all that into Derrick Henry based on his 2020 numbers, Henry would have rushed for 1,220 yards and 12 touchdowns. Still pretty good, but is he worth a top 5 pick? And keep in mind, this is not one of those scenarios, well, age has a lot to do with it. Well, not really. The only 2 running backs to rush for over 2,000 yards at age 27 or older, that was Barry Sanders and Adrian Peterson. Everybody else was either 24 or 26. Henry is going to be 26. So this is not an age situation, right? This is a workload situation. Over the last 2 years, Derrick Henry, regular season and postseason, 782 carries, 827 touches. Guys, that's a lot of work. And I always say this, beware the magical season. Derrick Henry was awesome this year, just like Lamar Jackson was awesome last year. And if we were doing this segment at this time last year, and I said Lamar Jackson's going to finish as the QB 10, and a rookie quarterback who was supposed to have no value would have outscored him, you would have fitted me for a straitjacket. Guess what? That's exactly what happened. I'm not telling you that Derrick Henry is not worth a first-round pick, but I am telling you that drafting him in the top 5, folks, you better temper your expectations.
All right, Ben, we got pretty compelling stats there from Mr. Fabiano. What do you make of Derrick Henry's fantasy draft value for next season?
And I'm a stats guy too, Bill. And the argument that Counselor Fabiano has brought to the board is a very compelling one. I'll say this, he's still a top 5 running back for me, but at that very, very end of the line. If I'm ranking him, I still have Christian McCaffrey at number 1, followed by Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley at number 3, and depending on the quarterback situation for the New Orleans Saints, I'll have Alvin Kamara, this year's number 1 running back in PPR, probably in at number 4. Now, in standard leagues, go ahead and sign me up. I'll take the 1,220 projected rushing yards and the 12 touchdowns because I know that he's an integral part of what Tennessee does in the running game, and then it opens up play action. It's part of what Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown have been able to thrive on in Tennessee. And those numbers are fairly concerning, but I also think you have to look at what we saw from running backs this year. The top guys on the board, there's no clear-cut consistent, reliable option all the time. Christian McCaffrey missed the bulk of the season. Saquon Barkley in the very early portion of the season ended up missing the entire year with a torn ACL. Dalvin Cook missed a couple of games. There's no clear-cut number 1 guy that you can always consistently rely on. And yes, even though Derrick Henry has some numbers going against him the following year, he's also a bit of an athletic freak that's been continued to add on to these types of numbers and this type of production over the last handful of seasons. So I do think even if his numbers take a pretty substantial dip and goes down to 1,220 yards and 12 touchdowns, yes, that's substantial. But I also think based on what we see out of running backs every year, it's just a position that warrants volatility. And I still will put him in the end of the top 5 just because I know that there's still going to be some element to rely on him, at least along the way.
These debates, always a lot of fun. Fantasy football, it never ends here at Sports Illustrated. Check out more great insight from Michael Fabiano, Ben Heisler, and the whole SI fantasy team by going to si.com/fantasy.